3 days before my promotion was finalized, my best friend handed my wife a plane ticket, and my parents told me I should be grateful he cared enough to get her out of a bad situation. 6 months later, I watched from a distance as everything they'd built together burned so completely that even the ashes were unrecognizable. I never thought I'd be the kind of guy who posts his personal disaster on the internet. But here I am, 34 years old, sitting in a house that actually feels like mine for the first time in years, trying to make sense of how I got here. So I'll start at the beginning, because that's the only way any of this makes sense. My name is Weston. I'm a structural engineer, the kind of guy who spends his days making sure other people's buildings don't fall down. Ironic, I know, given what happened to mine. I'd been married to my wife for 4 years when everything collapsed. Her name was Camille, not the version of Camille I thought I knew, but we'll get to that. We met the way people used to meet before apps made everything feel like a catalog. Mutual friends, a backyard cookout, August heat that made everyone stand close to the coolers. She laughed at something I said that wasn't even that funny, and I thought, okay, this one's different. We dated 2 years before I proposed. Nothing flashy, I'm not that guy. Just the two of us at the overlooked park near her old apartment. The ring her grandmother had left her family that she'd shown me once without realizing I was paying attention. She cried. Good tears, she said. I believed her. We bought a house in a suburb outside Columbus. Not the biggest house on the block, but I'd helped design the renovation plans myself. Knocked out a load-bearing wall the right way, opened up the kitchen, built a reading nook into the east window because she'd mentioned once that she wanted one. I put 8 months of evenings into that house. That matters later. My best friend for 12 years, Philip, had been in our lives the whole time. We'd roomed together sophomore year of college, survived 2 miserable post-grad apartments, been in each other's weddings, his first, mine, only. He was the godfather of a hypothetical future kid we used to joke about. He was the kind of friend where you don't talk for 3 weeks, and then pick up exactly where you left off. I trusted him. The way you trust someone when you've never had a reason not to. He worked in private equity. I never fully understood what he did. But it paid well. And he wore it quietly, which I respected. He'd recently moved back to Columbus after a few years in Chicago, and I was glad to have him closer. My wife seemed glad too. They got along great. I want to say that clearly, because I think looking back, I use that as a reason not to look closer. You want your wife to like your friends. You want it to feel easy. And it did feel easy. So easy I stopped noticing how natural it had gotten. The first sign I actually registered was small. Philip had started texting her about restaurant recommendations. Then asking her opinion on furniture for his new place. Then mentioning her by name in conversations with me, in that slightly too casual way people do when they're trying to make something sound like nothing. I told myself it was fine. They were just friends. I was secure. I wasn't some jealous husband who needed to monitor his wife's texts. That was the story I told myself, and I told it well. The Friday before my promotion was supposed to go through, a senior project manager role I'd been working toward for 3 years. I came home to find my wife sitting at the kitchen table, with her hands folded in front of her, like she was about to deliver a verdict. The reading nook I'd built was right there in my peripheral vision. I remember noticing that. She said she needed to tell me something. I sat down across from her. I didn't say anything. I could feel it before she opened her mouth. I can't do this anymore, she said. Not angry, not crying, just flat, like she'd rehearsed it enough that the emotion had worn off. I haven't been happy for a long time, Weston. And I think you know that. I didn't know that. Or maybe I did, and had decided not to examine it. I'm still not sure which is worse. I asked her what she meant by this. She said our marriage. She said it had started to feel like a business arrangement. She said she needed space to figure out who she was. I sat very still and asked her if there was someone else. She looked at the table. Not at me, the table. Philip and I have been spending time together, she said. I think I have feelings for him. I want to tell you I handled it with grace. I want to say I stayed calm and asked the right questions. What actually happened is that I stood up and walked to the back porch, and stood there for about 20 minutes, staring at the yard. I'd regraded the previous spring, so it would drain properly. The details you notice when everything else stops making sense. She gave me the space. Or maybe she just didn't follow me. When I came back inside, she said Philip had offered to help her figure out next steps. That he'd been a good listener. That she hoped I could understand. This wasn't about hurting me. I asked how long. She said a few months of talking. Nothing physical, she said. Not until she told me. She said that like it was a point in her favor. I went to my parents' house that night. My dad poured whiskey, and my mom sat with me at the kitchen table and I waited. I think I needed them to be angry with me, to be angry for me something. Instead my dad cleared his throat and said, Weston, Philip's a good man. You know that. My mom put her hand over mine, and said Camille had seemed unhappy for a while, and maybe this was the universe nudging everyone toward where they were supposed to be. I stared at my father. She left me for my best friend, I said. 2 days before my promotion comes through. And you're talking about the universe. My dad said I was being too black and white about it. I drove home at 11 o'clock, sat in my driveway for a while, and went to sleep on the couch, because I couldn't make myself go into the bedroom. The promotion went through Monday morning, congratulations from my boss and a firm handshake. I smiled and thanked him. I have no memory of the rest of that day. Philip called me Wednesday. I almost didn't pick up. Part of me, the part that had known him for 12 years, that had driven 4 hours to help him move apartments twice, that had stood next to him at his first wedding. That part answered. He didn't apologize. Not really. He said something like, "I know this is hard, and I want you to know I didn't plan for this to happen." He said feelings weren't always something you could control. He said he hoped eventually we could get back to some version of a friendship, because I meant a lot to him. I asked him how long he'd had feelings for her. He paused. Then he said honestly, probably longer than he'd admitted to himself. I hung up. My parents called 2 days later. Not to check on me, to tell me that Philip and Camille were going to start seeing each other openly, and they thought it would be good if I knew before I heard it from someone else. My mom added that they hoped I'd give it time and not do anything rash. My dad said Philip had called them directly, which I thought was strange, but they seemed touched by it. He was very respectful, my dad said. He knows how much family means. Philip had called my parents before I'd even fully processed what happened. That was the moment things shifted for me. Not just the betrayal. That was one wound. But this was something else. This was calculated. The weeks that followed were the kind of quiet that feels loud. I went to work. I came home to the house I'd renovated with my own hands. I ate whatever was easy and didn't sleep great. Mutual friends disappeared in the slow way they do when they don't want to pick a side. Which is itself a side. But I didn't have the energy to say that out loud. My parents kept in regular contact with Philip. I found this out gradually. He'd stopped by for dinner. He'd helped my dad with something at the house. He was becoming a fixture in the family I thought was mine. While I was standing in the same city feeling invisible, I told my parents this felt like a betrayal on top of a betrayal. My mom said I was making it harder on everyone by not moving forward. My dad said Philip was still a good man and my reaction was driving a wedge that didn't need to be there. He took my wife, I said. Camille made her own choice, my dad replied, which was technically true and completely missed the point. About 3 months in, my parents invited me to Sunday dinner. I went because I'm still me. And I was hoping maybe some version of what we used to be would show up at the table. Philip was there. My mother had set a place for him across from me. She said she thought it would be good for us to be in the same room. To start healing as a family, her words. Philip looked genuinely uncomfortable. I'll give him that. But he sat down. He didn't leave. I stayed for 20 minutes. Long enough to eat a roll and make sure everyone in the room understood exactly how badly they'd miscalculated. Then I set my napkin down and told my parents I needed some space to process what they'd decided. Family looked like now. My dad followed me to the driveway. He said I was being dramatic. He said family was bigger than one conflict. It's not one conflict. I said, you invited the man who is sleeping with my wife to Sunday dinner and you seated him across from me, and called it healing. He said I'd feel differently when I calmed down. I drove away and didn't answer their calls for 2 weeks. Then things started happening at work that didn't make sense. I'd been brought in to lead a hospital expansion project. Significant, the kind of thing that would define the next few years of my career. I had the scope, the client relationship, the team. Then quietly, I started getting edged out of meetings. The project coordinator stopped copying me on certain emails. My manager had a closed-door conversation with someone from HR that he didn't mention afterward. I pulled aside a colleague I trusted, a guy named Douglas who'd been with the firm 12 years, and asked him directly if he'd heard anything. He looked at me with that expression people make when they know something they don't want to say. There's been a concern raised, he said careful, about your judgment. Someone suggested you'd been distracted and that it was affecting your work. Who? He didn't answer directly, but he said the concern had come in through an external channel. Not from anyone inside the firm. I sat with that for 2 days before I called my manager and asked for a direct conversation. He was careful, diplomatic, said nothing had been decided, that it was a flag someone had raised, that they took these things seriously, especially on a project of this size. He said the concern was that my personal situation had compromised my ability to focus, and that I'd seemed erratic in some client-facing interactions. I had not been erratic. I had been quiet. Those are different things. I asked who had raised the concern. He said he couldn't share that, but the way he shifted in his chair when I mentioned Philip's name by accident. I said it without thinking, just as an example of stress in my personal life. The way he stilled for just a second told me what I needed to know. Philip worked in private equity. His firm had done business with the parent company of my firm's biggest client. I'd known that abstractly for years and never thought about it. Now I was thinking about it very hard. I didn't explode. I didn't make accusations. I went home, poured myself a glass of water, sat at my kitchen counter, and thought about what I actually knew versus what I was assuming. I made a list. I'm an engineer. Lists are how I think. What I knew: Philip had established himself with my family before I'd processed what happened. He had financial ties to my industry. A concern had been raised about me through an external channel, at exactly the moment I was about to lead the most visible project of my career. The concern used the word erratic. The same swear word my dad had thrown at me in the driveway. What I did was nothing. Not yet. I found a lawyer. Not a divorce attorney, though I needed one of those too. I mean a lawyer who specialized in professional interference claims. I laid everything out. She listened without expression, which I appreciated. At the end she said, "This is harder to prove than you think. But not impossible, and you should document everything from this point forward." I documented everything. Meanwhile, the Sunday dinners kept happening without me. I heard about them secondhand from my aunt, who still texted me occasionally, never taking sides but always letting small things slip. Philip was at most of them. Camille had come to one, which I hadn't expected. My parents apparently loved her. The family I'd grown up in was being reshuffled around. A couple that had formed in the rubble of my marriage, and everyone seemed to think I was the difficult one for not attending. My mom called one evening and asked if I was seeing a therapist. I said yes, which was true. She said that was good. Then she said she thought eventually I'd understand that Philip had been generous in how he'd handled the transition, and she hoped I could acknowledge that. I asked what she considered generous. She said he'd been careful not to embarrass me, that he'd spoken respectfully about me to the family, that he'd gone out of his way to make sure I wasn't excluded from family events, that the door was always open. I said, "Mom, he's dating my wife." She said, "Ex-wife." We weren't even divorced yet. I filed the paperwork shortly after. The house was mine. I'd owned it before the marriage, and the renovation was documented as my sole investment. Camille didn't contest it. She moved into Philip's apartment in the short north, a part of Columbus that suited them both. I stayed in the reading nook house and painted the bedroom a color I'd have never picked before, a dark slate green that turned out to be exactly right. Work stabilized. The project concern quietly disappeared, which told me either the documentation had worked, or Philip had pulled back. When he realized I wasn't going to be a passive target, I kept my head down and delivered the hospital expansion on schedule. My manager shook my hand again. This time I remembered the day. I'd been quiet for 8 months when my phone rang at 6:30 on a Tuesday morning. It was my father. His voice was different, thin. The way people sound when something has collapsed and they're still standing in the middle of it. He said there was a problem. Philip's firm was under federal investigation. Securities fraud. Specifically a pattern of misrepresenting investment vehicles to retail clients. Regular people who'd trusted the firm with retirement accounts and college funds. The SEC had been building the case for over a year. The lead investigator's name had been all over the financial news since 7 the previous evening. Which was apparently when my parents had found out. And they'd spent all night trying to reach me. I looked at the missed calls. 41 from my parents. 19 from a number I didn't recognize. 6 from my brother, who almost never called. I made coffee. My dad said they needed me to come over. That Philip was there, and they needed to figure out what to do. That I had contacts in the industry, that I knew people, that maybe I could help. I said, "Why would I help Philip?" Long silence. "He's family," my dad said. I repeated it back to him slowly. "He's family, Weston. He's been part of this family for months now. You know how much we care about him, and this is serious. This isn't just about him. This affects your mother and me too, our reputation." "Dad," I said quietly, "you invited him to Sunday dinner 3 weeks after he started sleeping with my wife. You told me I was being dramatic. You told me he was generous, and now you're calling me at 6:30. Because his choices have caught up with him. And you want my industry connections to help clean it up." Another silence. "Come over," he said, "please." I told him I'd think about it. I didn't go. What I did instead was call Douglas, my colleague, and ask him to pull everything our firm had on Philip's company. Not as a favor. As due diligence, because if there was going to be a ripple through our client network, I needed to know about it before it hit my desk. Douglas pulled it. It took about 4 hours. By noon I had a clear picture of the exposure. Which was significant but manageable. And I forwarded the relevant pieces to our risk team with a clean memo. My manager called me that afternoon and told me it was exactly the right move. That felt good. Not because of what was happening to Philip. I wasn't celebrating that. But, because for the first time in 8 months, the version of me I'd been trying to protect had done something that mattered. My parents showed up at my house that evening. Both of them, which they hadn't done since before everything fell apart. My dad looked smaller than I remembered. The way men look when the structure they've built around themselves gets stress tested. My eyes were red. I let them in, because I wasn't raised to be cruel. My dad sat on my couch and said he needed to tell me something. He said he and my mom had known for a while that Philip's firm had been operating in ways that weren't entirely above board. Not the full extent of the fraud. They hadn't known that, he said, and I believed him. But they'd known he was cutting corners, pressuring clients, that there had been complaints, and they'd chosen not to mention it to me. I asked why. He said they thought I was already struggling, and they didn't want to add to it. He said they'd also convinced themselves it was probably industry standard behavior, that everyone bent rules in finance, that Philip was smart enough to manage it. You knew he might be dishonest, I said, and you let him into the family. My dad nodded slowly. He looked at the floor when he did it. We made mistakes, my mom said. Her voice was very small. With you? We minimized what you were going through. We let him fill a role he hadn't earned. I sat across from them and didn't say anything for a while. I don't know how to unfeel what I felt, I finally said. When you told me he was generous. When you seated him across from me at the table. When you called and asked me to use my connections to help him. My dad said he knew. My mom asked if there was any road back. I told them I didn't know yet. That was honest. The federal case moved fast. Philip cooperated early, which reduced his exposure but didn't eliminate it. 6 of his colleagues were charged alongside him. The firm was dissolved. Camille, from what I heard through my aunt, had been unaware of the specifics. She'd known he worked in finance, not the mechanics of what he was actually doing. Whether that mattered depended on who you asked. She and Philip separated 4 months after the investigation went public. I heard she moved back to her hometown in western Pennsylvania, somewhere near where she'd grown up. I didn't reach out. There was nothing left to say. My parents started therapy. Couples therapy first, then my mom individually. This came from my aunt too, delivered in the careful way she delivers things. Not gossip. Just information she thought I deserved. I appreciated that my parents were doing it. I didn't feel relief exactly, but I noted it. My dad called me once a week for 2 months before I agreed to meet him for coffee. We sat at a diner near his house. The kind of place with laminated menus and pie in a rotating case. And he ordered decaf and said he'd been thinking about something. He said he'd spent a long time understanding his own worth through other people's success. That having Philip nearby had felt like acquiring something. The kind of son-in-law, he realized now, that he'd always imagined. Smart, connected, suited. And that he'd let that hunger override his judgment about what his actual son was going through. He said, Chester has always been the better son. Wait, no. That was a different story, a different father. What mine said was, I think I told myself you were resilient. That you didn't need me to fight for you. That you were fine. He looked at the coffee cup. I think I told myself that so I didn't have to feel guilty about choosing the easier path. I didn't say it was okay because it wasn't. But I told him I heard him. And that was true. I'm not sure we're back to what we were. I'm not sure that version of us exists anymore. What I think is that we're building something slower, more honest, less polished. Maybe that's better. I don't know yet. Work has been good. The hospital project came in under budget, and the client brought us a new scope before the ink was dry on the first contract. My boss mentioned a partnership track, in a way that wasn't quite a promise but wasn't nothing either. I bought a good espresso machine, and I use it every morning. Small things. I started seeing someone about 5 months ago. Her name is Adrienne, which I can say with confidence is a name nobody warned me about. She teaches high school chemistry. And has exactly zero interest in private equity or corporate reputation, or what my last name sounds like at a dinner party. She makes fun of my organizational system for my kitchen cabinet, in a way that makes me want to explain it to her every single time. On our 3rd date she asked me if I had a complicated relationship with my family. I laughed. She raised her eyebrows. I said something like, that's a fair description. She said, mine too. Complicated doesn't have to mean broken. I've thought about that a lot since. There's a moment I keep coming back to. It was about 3 weeks after the investigation went public. I was sitting at my kitchen counter late, work finished, coffee cold, and I was looking at the renovation plans I'd done for this house. The original pencil sketches, not the final CADs. And I realized I'd designed it for someone else to enjoy. The reading nook, the kitchen opening, the drainage in the yard. All of it had been arranged around what someone else wanted. I didn't change any of it. I still like the kitchen. The reading nook is actually where I drink my coffee now, most mornings, facing the east light, but something shifted in how I thought about it. I stopped seeing it as proof of what I'd lost, and started seeing it as a house that's still standing. I built it to last. Turns out I built it for myself. The people who are in my life now. Adrienne. Douglas from work who checked in every week even when I gave him nothing back. My aunt who texted me just enough. My friend Marcus from college who drove 2 hours one Saturday just to sit in my backyard and not ask me how I was doing. Those people didn't arrive because I'd earned them through some performance of resilience. They just showed up. Consistently. Without needing me to be okay. That's the whole thing actually. That's what I learned under all of it. I spent years building structures that were supposed to hold. What I didn't understand until recently is that the strongest ones aren't built to look impressive from the outside. They're built to distribute weight evenly, to flex without fracturing, to hold steady when the conditions change. The ones that collapse are usually the ones where someone cut a corner you couldn't see from street level. I can see it now. And I know exactly how to build something better.